Hello, hello. I'm pulling you up on my phone so I can actually see you because it's not all about me. It's about you guys. Happy Friday. It is Friday. We were just discussing how I need a theme song or something and that my husband and kids should write one and dance around in the background. But for now, you just get me. I think I'm wearing the same clothes as I did last week, so maybe this will become my deep dive uniform because it's cold and these clothes are warm. Okay. Start with my little intro and then we'll be off to the races. So, hi, for anybody who's brand new, my name is Ellie Leonard. I am an independent journalist. I am what we call a citizen journalist. I don't think I coined that term, but we are all citizen journalists. And that just means that we're all doing our part to do our homework, spread truthful information, research and investigate the things we are given, and then push to ask for more when we're not given the things we're supposed to be given, which we've seen this week in the hearings in Washington, D.C. We are going to gather each week and talk about what we found, why it's important, how to move forward, and then, embrace the fact that inside the DOJ, they have a very small amount of people doing this investigation, but outside the DOJ, we have limitless resources and people and hearts and minds who are ready to do this deep dive dig on the Epstein files in order to find justice for all the people involved, because it's been a hell of a long time. So I'm really glad you're here. I was just thinking about ways, the ways that I decompress and the dumb little things that I do that take me out of the deep, hard, dark stuff that we're all searching through. I don't know about you guys, but I watch a lot of Josh Johnson. I think he's the smartest comedian ever. He's so on top of anything that's coming out of the news. And he's very conversational, and I can open up the computer, I can look at the news, and then I can open up Josh Johnson's platform, whatever he's on, and he already has a spot on this specific story. He's already talking about 3.5 million files. He's already talking about Melinda Gates. He's already talking about everything. He's very smart. So I watch him. I watch something called Baumgartner Restoration, which is very niche, but I'm guessing somebody must know what that is. But it's a guy who restores paintings out of Chicago, and it's so fascinating. And he just talks about how he gets the dirt off the paintings and how he pins it down to the frame and how he takes away. I don't know. It's very dumb and very niche, but it just softens my heart for a minute when we're going through all this hard stuff. And, people ask me a lot about my mental health and how I deal with this. And I think also too, now that everybody's doing this kind of dive, how is your mental health? How are you guys doing? What do you do to pull away from this and go back to your families or your pets or your jobs and not take it to bed with you? For me, this is not my first rodeo. I've done a lot of these projects, and throughout Me Too, I was doing, I was working peripherally in journalism with my small business, which is transcription. I was working through the Weinstein story. And I heard a lot of Trump stories off the record about women that he had assaulted. It's why when he ran for president the first time, I begged friends and family not to vote for him, because I knew the stories already, and I knew that they were not public, but I knew the things that he did. And so this stuff is not new for me. I think what's new for me and what I have to bear in mind with mental health is being a little bit in the spotlight, which is not something that I'm used to or comfortable with. I'm happy to be here, obviously, but it's not my norm. It's not my jam. I'm used to being a little faceless and nameless and behind the scenes and just digging for these details that matter. And that's where I feel my talent lies, is the digging. So I'm learning to be in front of the camera instead of behind it, which is definitely a learning process. But I am really excited to meet a lot of new people, which I'll talk a little bit at the other end of the show. A lot of people say when they do these things, or like when you watch reality TV, they go, I'm not here to make friends. And like, I'm always here to make friends. Like, that's probably one of my top things that I'm looking for. Is I really like making friends. I like meeting new people. I like getting to know people. And so that part of the, the hard stuff and the scary on camera stuff has been really great. So today we're going to talk about a few things, some of the stuff that went on this week with other Substackers, people I'm working with, really, really important things that happened in Washington, D.C. Some of us were down there, some of us were on the phone. But obviously, so many sound bites came out of those hearings. But but first, to back up, something that we had been working on, and mainly Zev Shalev and I. So if you're not subscribed to Zev Shalev, I highly recommend subscribing to him. He's a great writer. He writes something called The Greatest Heist that covers a lot of the money and some of this the collusion with Russia that Epstein was doing, and the JP Morgan stuff, and basically the basis for much of this story, where the girls were kind of the result of the money things. So anyway, he and I had been decoding this journal that we found that Substackers were bringing to us, which is amazing. We found 4 parts of it. I'm assuming there are more parts, but we have 4. And so we have about, I think it was 116 pages of a journal. We do not know who wrote the journal. I had assumptions about who made the journal. My assumptions were likely wrong. So, either way, be that as it may, we weren't going to name who wrote the journal because it was redacted, and it's redacted for a reason. It's one of the good redactions is to keep the survivors safe. So we had been decoding this journal, which had been decoded already, but it was in kind of like a text format. So you would see, you'd see text threads of it in black and white on Reddit, on, in the files, which is not, it doesn't pop, right? And that's a horrible way to describe it. But like when you have a colorful journal that's full of magazine clippings and photographs, and then you have like a text decoding of this journal that's just a document somewhere, nobody's thinking about it. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's, on the news about it. It's not in Congress, like it's nowhere. And so we use some of this decoding stuff. And then I just went through and decoded it myself because it was a very simple code. It was written originally by a 16-year-old girl, and so it was pretty easy to figure out. The only hard parts were just where it was a little bit lighter, like it had been photocopied poorly. So went in there, decoded it, made things easier to see, and then did a side-by-side, right? Created these side-by-side documents of coded pages and uncoded pages. And the cool thing about this, not cool, but cool, is because the DOJ did not take the time to decode this themselves, because they were just like, oh, look at that big mess. Well, whatever, we'll just put it in the files. They didn't realize it had a very long list of unredacted perpetrators in this document. And so backing up, we had to figure out, based on things that we were seeing in this document, in this journal, what years was this being written? And so, we started to see things like there was a cutout of a Game Boy Color. Okay, when was the Game Boy Color out? Okay, that was 1998. There were little clippings that we got to trace back to Vanity Fair. Okay, we can find the issues of Vanity Fair. This is all late 90s, early 2000s. There was a birthday card that had a red convertible that was like the first page of the first section of this journal. I don't know if it was actually the first page of the journal. It was issued in 1999 by something called Carter Cards, and it was a 16th birthday. It was happy 16th birthday. So we go, okay, 1999, turning 16. It may have been given to her a year later, could have been 2000. Whoever this was born around 1983, 1984. Then we start to see letters from boyfriends, letters from high school friends, things that are dated. I think we got as late as maybe 2003. So this was like 4 years of journaling. In it was some of the darkest things that I have read thus far. There are typical MOs of Jeffrey Epstein. There are the things that we hear about him pulling girls out of Mar-a-Lago, pulling girls out of Royal Palm Beach High School, I think it's called, and telling them to bring their friends, and like that kind of typical MO that you hear about. And then there's the really dark stuff that I think at some point we started to realize was less conspiratorial. And a lot of that surrounds Zorro Ranch, which has not been investigated. And that is on purpose. The governor of of New Mexico. Is he Bill Richardson? Bill Richardson was one of the politicians. Either way, the governor of New Mexico was one of the people who was abusing girls, and that was brought up by Virginia Giuffre in her book. And so that then makes it so there's, all investigations stop in New Mexico, all law enforcement stops in New Mexico, and you can read this in some of these emails that say, we're searching through Palm Beach, we're searching through the New York mansion, we're searching through the island. Let's not search New Mexico. I think let's put that last on our list. But what you have to remember is it's the biggest property of all his properties. It's 8,000 acres. So it is humongous. And there are rumors about girls who have died on that property, which is, it's not that far from reality if you think about it, because we do know that there were some abusers who came onto the island and in various places who like to choke girls until they passed out. And so the idea of a girl not coming to, especially if she was somebody who came from overseas and didn't have as much identification, didn't have a social security number, that could happen and there would be nobody looking for her. And yet they have never done an investigation on the property. And now we are, 20, 30 years later. It would be hard to do an investigation in the house. There's not going to be a lot of evidence left, but on the property, they could get cadaver dogs out there. They could get lots of investigation stuff out there. So that is a really big deal. And so we start to read in this journal about this girl who escaped from Zorro Ranch. She was told to put everything in a trash bag, anything that she thought was valuable, and she left. This is after trigger warning, this is after multiple pregnancies. And that is something that's starting to pop up in these stories, is the idea of there being babies. And we've heard about baby farming and this idea that he wanted to spread his seed because he thought he was this powerful, intelligent musician, that, his genes should be spread through these very thin, beautiful blonde girls from Eastern Europe or the Americas. He thought that was like creating this perfect race, which is very ironic considering his heritage. He was Jewish, but he had these, as described in this journal, he had these ideologies that were embraced by the Nazis of creating kind of a perfect race, which then he started impregnating girls. And we don't have a lot of those stories, but we do from this girl. And she describes multiple pregnancies. Some died, some were aborted. But the babies that lived and were held to term were taken from her. And she describes giving birth with a midwife somewhere on South Ocean Boulevard in Palm Beach, and which is known as Billionaires Row. So there's a lot of billionaires and wealthy people who live on South Ocean Boulevard. But in some house on that boulevard, which is, by the way, where Mar-a-Lago is, there was a midwife delivering babies. And she said that Ghislaine Maxwell would cover her eyes and she could see little hands and little feet through her fingers. And then ultimately there was one baby that she was allowed to feed for 15 minutes. And then it was taken away by somebody called Mr. M and some women who were in a car. And they took the baby away, and she was, obviously grieving and screaming and telling them not to take her child. So this is incredibly, incredibly dark stuff. And again, when you have accounts like this that come from prior to both cases for Epstein, so prior to 2019, prior to 2008 when he had his first case, that gives them credibility, because not a lot of people were talking about Jeffrey Epstein. He wasn't in all the magazines. He wasn't in all the newspapers. He wasn't on the news. And yet we had these accounts all of a sudden of girls coming forward saying these things are happening, or writing in their journals and saying these things are happening, writing in code so that nobody knows these things are happening. And thank you, Lawrence. Yeah, Bill Richardson. Okay, governor of New Mexico. And so that gives them credibility, because I don't think any of these girls assumed someone was going to listen to them back then. Nobody was looking for them, and they told this story. So to me, that's very credible. But again, we go back to these things that are in the journal that were unredacted, and the DOJ didn't know. They either are understaffed, whatever, but they didn't make the effort to decode these journals that were very simple to decode. And there were several people named. So let's name them, shall we? Okay. In sports, I listed them in categories, okay? A lot of this stuff actually took place around the state of Virginia. So if you think of, there's a lot of politicians and people, around DC area. So, I mean, and then she also had a brochure for Colonial Williamsburg. So you started to figure out where she was talking about. But there in sports, they had two guys named Dan Snyder and Joe Gibbs. These are people who own sports teams. In academics, you had Lawrence Krauss from ASU, Marvin Minsky from MIT, and Martin Novak from Harvard. In politics, you had Bob Goodlatte. I don't know how to pronounce his name. He was a representative from Virginia, Republican. You had George Mitchell, who was a Democrat from Maine, and you had Bill Clinton, Democrat from Arkansas. In film, she describes Harvey Weinstein. Philanthropists were in there. There's a guy named Joseph E. Roberts and his wife, Jill Sorensen. You had a whole bunch of AOL execs who were also out of Virginia because that is where they are headquarters. You had someone named Ted Leonsis, you had Steve Case, and you had George Vredenberg. In legal, she described Alan Dershowitz. In finance, you had Jez Staley from JP Morgan and Leon Black, who keeps coming up from Apollo. In modeling, you had Jean-Luc Brunel. She describes out of royalty, Prince Andrew. And then you had the typical, you had Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, and then you had someone named Miss Vicky. You had an old French woman who was the midwife, and then you had someone named Mr. M. She describes in this journal that AOL does not protect kids. Very cryptic, but I mean, describing all these people who worked at AOL, who were there as perpetrators. Like all these people were perpetrators. They were in the room, either actively perpetrating these acts, filming, right? She describes people filming her, taking pictures of her, abusing her. And then like a couple, she said, were just in the room, but aware, 100% aware. Let's see, what else did she say? Oh, here was something very interesting that the DOJ did not catch. She puts a little quote from Ivana Trump, his now deceased ex-wife, which is another story, talking about how Princess Di had come to her and said, you went through your divorce with such dignity. I hope that I can go through my divorce with that kind of dignity. So that would have been around 1996. And then there's a quote that this writer of the journal puts next to Ivana's quote. And she says, "Doesn't this lady know you can't have dignity if you've been with him? I know I have none," meaning that she had been with Donald Trump. She describes, trigger warning, she describes violent attacks by Leon Black that included biting, a lot of biting. And that was his MO. That was something that we saw in other lawsuits. You know, we had a Jane Doe versus Leon Black described biting. That was the thing that he did. She described multiple abortions, miscarriages, and babies being taken away. And then she would hear Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein in another room arguing and fighting over what was going to happen to these babies because they were not on the same page about what was going to happen to the babies. There were a lot of descriptions of Ghislaine Maxwell wanting to be more, I think she wanted to be a mother. And so she wanted to keep these children, like her mothering instinct is as deep as it must have been under the layers. She wanted to keep the children, and Jeffrey Epstein wanted to just make the children and ship them off. Nobody knows where these kids went. This girl has no idea where her babies are, and much of her journal is searching for them and saying, "Where are you? I need to find you. I love you." And she doesn't know. There's discussion of being too young for this, missing school, being put into eating disorder treatment. And then again, that Epstein was, he was talking about his musical talent and his brains and his, he saw himself as this great philosopher, one of the great intelligent minds of all time, dropped out of college, but whatever. And so we're starting to hear about, these summer camps of Interlochen in Michigan. Is it in Michigan? music camps where he was paying for girls' tuition because he used to go to music camp there, and then he was abusing girls there. He thought he could take all that. He could take the thinnest, most beautiful, blondest, blue-eyed girls, and he could put their genes together and make perfect babies and put them out into the world. And now we're actually starting to see that. That was a conspiracy before, and now we're actually starting to see that that may not have been so much of a conspiracy. Okay, and that was most of the stuff from the journal. So what we did with that, we put it all together. We made it visible. We did the side-by-side with the codes and the decoding and posted it to Substack. Zev then wrote breakdowns about what does it mean? What does each section mean, and how does it pertain with what's going on now with the Epstein files? And then Lev Parnas went down this week to DC to the hearings. And he needed everything to be compiled because he said, you know, a lot of these people are getting their information from the news. They're not seeing these files. Like, these are things that we are seeing, but a lot of these senators and representatives are not getting as much of a deep dive as we have, although they now have the unredacted file. So they have the opportunity to do so. I don't know how much time they have to do it. I don't know how much effort is behind them wanting to do it. So we compiled all this stuff, gave it to Lev. Lev took it to DC. And then I got 2 phone calls, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday, that I about fell out of my chair. And the first one was Jasmine Crockett. And she was about to go into the SCIF. And don't ask me to remember what that stands for. But basically, she and the other reps were going to go in and they were going to talk about what they had before they went out on the floor and they deposed Pam Bondi. I told her, I said, hey, we have this journal, we have this girl, we have indications of Donald Trump, we have absolutely a long list of named men that include people on both sides of the political aisle. They include politicians, they include industry folks, they include academics. I mean, it's just everybody. And here are the main points. Like, if you have to look at 3 things, here are the main points. Mar-a-Lago, really big in this. They talk about girls being in the backyard. What does that mean? And Zev gives a breakdown of that. But like, very situated around South Ocean Boulevard, Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump, Palm Beach, Zorro. So she said, okay, thank you very much. Took that into the SCIF, and then went and ripped Bondi a new one. Fabulous job. And then the next day I talked with Jamie Raskin and we kind of went over some of the same things, and the idea of opening up a line of communication between what we're finding, right? These documents that we're finding, and the House Judiciary Committee, so that we can say, oh my gosh, I found this. I'm going to send it straight to you. You're going to have it immediately, and then you can take it out on the floor and talk about it. So that's the plan. We have opened up this line of communication between independent journalists and Congress. And isn't that what we need? Like, that's what we need. That is, we the people now have the ability to say, we found it. Here's the evidence. We can prove it. We can pull it from the files. We can give you the file number, and then we can just hand it to you and you can read it and you take it seriously. I'm not calling your office. I'm not calling your 1-800 number. I'm literally handing it to you. So that is the plan moving forward. And I think that will give us more results, I hope. I just have such faith in the next 10 months, 9 months, however long till the midterms. I have a lot of faith in what's about to happen, because we are starting to see this house of cards come down. We saw Kathy Rumler was resigned yesterday, which, by God, ta-ta Felicia, like, that was a long time coming. She had a weird relationship with Epstein. She was, I'm trying to remember her position, but she worked for Obama, and her contact so far, what we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I had transcribed all her emails in previous drops of files, was all about 3 months probably after she left office. She was corresponding with Epstein all the time he had a very weird flirtatious relationships with women who were not these young girls. So like Kathy Rumler, Fergie, I'm going through Fergie's emails right now, very weird. There were people in his life who he had more like sister relationships, but they were still sleeping together. I don't know if Kathy Rumler was sleeping with him. Pretty sure Fergie was. We'll get there. But now we have this documentation. We're starting to see people overseas, just fired, resigned. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. So I have faith that we're going to start to see some results, because moving on, like, those hearings were a shit show. Sorry. I don't know how else to describe them. I don't know many people who are devoted MAGAs who walked away, if they watched. That's the thing. If they watched those hearings, I don't know how many people walked away feeling very comfortable, because this investigation is the ultimate bluff calling for Donald Trump's base. They have been shouting for years about child sex trafficking rings and these kind of more conspiratorial things on QAnon. We literally have a child sex trafficking ring that wasn't the one on QAnon, but we have one that is fully documented, that includes names and people and places and evidence. And now the people that they look up to and voted for are telling them to look the other direction. And that's a gut check. That is something that they have to come to terms with. I know the MAGAs in my life are still very deep in this stuff. And also, part of that has to do with misinformation online. Like, I was sent a flight log that was all like Oprah, Ellen, Madonna, Jennifer Lopez. I don't know. It was just this long list of people that are not in the flight logs. And so I told the person, I said, well, that's not actually a flight log. Here are the flight logs. I can hand them to you. And also, I said, Donald Trump's not on this flight log, and it's been verified that he was on the airplane, and we have him in the flight log. So if he's not in this list, then this list is a false list. So that's it. I mean, that's just black and white. And they said, well, how do we know that the flight log that you guys have been given, meaning us, you guys, there's no you guys. This is one us guys. How do we know that that is real and this one is not real? And I said, great question. This one was issued by the FAA in the 90s. And we've had it for a very long time before. Again, great credibility is, did we get this before this whole case was buzzy? Yes, we did. This one came out. It is not anywhere else. It is listed only on social media. And it only lists people who are very, like, Democratic donors from Hollywood. So I said that's a kicker there. Like, you have to look at that. Remember, no matter what you believe, no matter how you plan to vote in the future, this is not bipartisan. You will see Bill Clinton on here. You will see Donald Trump on here. You will see everybody in between. And if you only see one list of people who are very much on one side, that's a clear indication that that's not accurate information, right? This is not bipartisan. This is, again, money and us, right? That is the politics here. It is not Democrat and Republican. It's the wealth gap, the giant wealthy people who have private planes, and the rest of the world, right? That's the divide. Very few people over here, the rest of the world, set aside, actually are in these files. But the wealthy people who are flying into Teterboro Airport on their private planes are almost all in the files. Like, that 1% we always talked about, guess what? That's the Epstein files. Okay, so moving on to the hearing. So we talked to Jasmine Crockett. We talked to Jamie Raskin. And again, we opened a clear line of communication into the House Judiciary Committee. So that means that's not just me or Zev or Lev or Waj. That's not just us going, oh, we found this, here you go. That is you guys continuing to dig, continuing to bring things or talk about things. Us going, holy cow, that's an amazing find. Compiling and taking. So, like, again, I don't think we're beating a dead horse. I think it's a legitimate story, but like the Michael Cohen email that we found that had started this whole ball rolling, that was found by a Substacker. That was not found by me. Like, I didn't find that, but somebody brought it to me and I said, hey, is this something? It looks like something. And then that got passed along. And there's been several things. The journals were given to me. I did not find the journals. But again, it's tough. I can't read through everything. So that gets very difficult because I get You know, I get the DMs, I get the emails, I get a lot of comments on the Dropbox files, a lot of Signal comments. So I can't get to everything. So as much as you guys and as much as you feel comfortable and safe can turn around and, was it not a good word for it, but like advertise the things that you have found, the better. Like just push this information out into Substack. Link people if you need to link people. Ask people to share it, but don't bring it inward, like push it outward. And that is how we are going to get this information out as fast as possible. Like all I did from the very beginning when nobody knew me from Adam was I just started posting things and being like, this sucks. Well, that's evidence. There's a name. And I just started posting, and like little by little people started to, whether it was the algorithm or whatever, they started to go, oh, I see that you wrote up something about Epstein. I'm going to share that, or I'm going to respond to that. And then Substack began to get those a little bit more traction, get more eyes on them, but that then gets the ball rolling and we get the information out the door. So as much as you guys feel comfortable and safe posting about the stuff that you find, the better, because then it gets out in the world faster. If it comes inward just to me, I'm still filtering through a lot of this stuff, but then I'm also digging on my own and I may go slower. So that's just, take that for what you want. So we had this hearing this week, and I'm going to guess that most people didn't watch the whole thing. It's a really big bummer. And I've said this before, it's a really big bummer that we don't have SNL this week, because perfect week for SNL. Like this entire hearing was just like a bouquet of MAGA disgusting sound bites that made no sense, and they were so obscure that I think unless you're really, 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 really living in a cave, you could see what was going on. Even if you voted for all these people, you could see what was going on. And it was probably, if you're somebody who feels you're well informed, but you tend to be on the conservative, this is my right, this is your right, on the right, it would be something you'd have to sit down and think for a little bit about, right? If somebody asks you a question about Epstein, if somebody asks you, to simply, are you willing to stand up and say, I'm really sorry that this investigation has taken 30 years. You guys deserve better. We're going to work harder. Like that's very bipartisan. That shouldn't, that's not a dig on anybody. That should have been an easy, like, yeah, you're right. We should have done better. We're going to work harder. We're going to end this for you women who are here and all the women that you represent. And that they can't do that. Like they couldn't, Pam Bondi could not do that. That has to be a big question mark for Trump voters. Like that has to be something that feels pretty uncomfortable. And you can cling to your politics or your what you feel are your like political morals. But there has to be some kind of a line drawn in the sand there where you start to look at like, does this follow the things that I believe? If I am a very avid churchgoer and I believe in these, I mean, it's a little hypocritical, but the family values, like, does the idea of abusing children that is, we have evidence that it's real, it's not fake, and nobody seems to be, fighting for them, nobody seems to be investigating it, nobody seems to be holding anybody to account, does that really represent my values as I tuck my kids into bed at night? That feels bad. And so I wonder, and I wish pride wasn't there. I wish people could talk about it. I wish people could be like, I feel bad and I need to talk about this, because I think it's such a great conversation and it's such a way to bring us all together and stop all the infighting that we've been taught to do over the years. This is a moment where we could actually like sit down in a room together and be like, I see something. It is bad, and I recognize that it's bad, and we all feel like it's bad, and here's what we could do that's good as a result of it, and it has nothing to do with Republicans or Democrats. Like that feels like a very easy thing to do, but we're not there yet. I would say, okay, in Pam Bondi's responses, I think what she was told to do or whatever was going on, she was told to talk only about ICE and immigration enforcement, which was, I was yelling a lot, and I hope nobody heard me because I was on a live stream. I think I was muted. as very exasperated. But like this whole idea of bringing up very specific instances where an immigrant has harmed someone or committed a crime or done something really terrible as the reasoning for wiping brown people off the map of the United States of America is statistically ridiculous. You can go to whatever source you want to go to and look up the instance of criminal, how do I want to say this? Like just the percentage of people who have a criminal record who are undocumented versus the percentage of people who have a criminal record who are citizens, right? US citizens versus non-US citizens in the US. What do criminal records look like? I did this a long time ago. Right after the election, I wrote a paper called "Would You Be Their Hiding Place?" and it's a kind of a compare and contrast of during the Holocaust and people who were not Jewish, but they were willing to hide Jewish people in their homes to protect them. I think of the story of Corrie ten Boom and hiding people in her father's clock shop. So it's like this idea of, would we be willing to do that now? Like that's something we have to think about. But also part of that is like, this is what we're being told. We're being told that they are violent rapists, murderers, and criminals, and blah, 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 blah. Okay. I'm going to look at multiple sources and I'm going to see what are the statistics for that. Okay. So if you have undocumented immigrants in the US, roughly 11 million is the number we've been given. 4% of those 11 million people have some kind of a criminal record. Not all violent crimes, obviously. Most are not violent crimes. There are unpaid parking tickets in there. There are things that are very low level. 4%. Okay, I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to look over here at US citizens, people who are fully documented or born here, lived here for generations, whatever. What percent of people who live in the US who are citizens have a criminal record that includes low-level crimes and unpaid parking tickets, but also violent crimes? 33%. 4%, 33%. I don't know about you. I don't really feel afraid of immigrants committing crimes. Most immigrants that I know, and I live in a very diverse place, it's very immigrant heavy. Most kids in my kids' school are immigrants or come from immigrant families. Even the white kids are immigrants. They're from Poland and Russia and Slovakia and Slovenia. Most people want to fly under the radar. They don't want to mess with the police. They do not want to get a criminal record because they know that there is a greater consequence for them if they do. Personally, this is just me. I'm way more sexist than I am more racist about people committing crimes. Like I am scared of middle-aged white men. Personally, if you've got a receding hairline and Coke bottle glasses, I am afraid of you. I will cross the street. I'm not afraid of immigrants committing crimes. I know that a lot of people just want to feed their families. We know a lot of families that have 3 and 4 generations under one roof, and they want their kids to go to school. Like that's the only thing that they're really thinking about. And so this idea that they will take certain cases like Lake and Riley, which was a horrible, horrible crime, but they will hold that as the representation for an entire race of people is obviously propaganda. So that was the response that she kept giving to anything that was about Epstein. Pam Bondi would say, yeah, but immigration policies. Yeah, but ICE. Yeah, but, and it was, I don't know who didn't see that for what it was unless they weren't watching, which I'm sure was a fair amount of people. If you go back and watch, there are 3 people to pay attention to in that hearing. Lots of great stuff was mentioned. Some stuff I didn't love. I don't remember who it was, but somebody who is a Democrat was mentioning that we needed to focus on women reporting more or victims or survivors reporting more. And I didn't really love that because it felt like he was putting the onus on survivors and making it kind of their fault. I don't know. That just didn't sit well with me. I was a little uncomfortable with that. So I didn't love that, but there were 3 that stood out. And the 3 were Ted Lieu, who is, let me see. Ted Lieu is from California. He's a rep from California. He brought up the redacted photos of Prince Andrew. And he was talking about, he had first asked Pam Bondi, do you think that we should prosecute anyone who is like a conspirator or a perpetrator in these files? And he got her to say yes. And he said, great, here's a photo. Here's 2 photos. And it was Prince Andrew, on all fours over top of a girl with a redacted face. He goes, redacted face, this is a survivor. That's why you redacted her face. So if you have a man laying over top of a survivor from these Epstein files, he is then inevitably a perpetrator. No matter what's happening in these photos, if she's a survivor, which means that she was an underage girl, and you have a man over top of her, he then becomes a perpetrator. So now you have one. Are you going to prosecute Prince Andrew? Are you? And then I'm sure she said something about immigration. He is the first one to watch. I really recommend watching his speech. The second one that I loved, I think she was my favorite, it was hard to choose, was Vermont Rep. Rebecca Balint. She was like everything that I was saying and feeling and yelling in my head, she was saying. Like, she did such a perfect job of recognizing the rage that we all feel in not only seeing kids be abused, but then and not only people just not doing something about it, but like actively fighting against doing something about it. It was just such a moment of unbridled emotional, just it was one of my favorite speeches of the day. And it also, to finish off, it was a beautiful moment. But Pam Bondi called her anti-Semitic, and she about lost her mind. Representative Balint about lost her mind because her grandfather died in the Holocaust. And I'm sure Pam Bondi had no idea, because Pam Bondi actively does not do her homework in any of this, especially not the Epstein files, but also the people she's talking with. She doesn't know anything about them. She lives in a box, and the box is Donald Trump's brain. Donald Trump's brain. And so she called her anti-Semitic, and Representative Balint about lost her mind. And I was just like, I just want to go buy this woman lunch. Like, she's my new favorite person. I didn't know about her. I try to know about all the people in politics, but there inevitably are representatives and senators that I don't know their names and I don't know their histories. And when they pop up and they do something really brave, I remember them and I write them down. Jared Moskowitz was always really great too, but he's fantastic. I love the sarcasm. I like the wit. Wit is important in this moment because it shows that people are not intelligent who are actively fighting against this, and that's helpful. But I think the coup de grace of the day was Representative Jasmine Crockett. She is just the spirit that we all need in this moment, where she was like, I'm not even going to talk to you. Like, I'm not going to ask you questions, Pam Bondi, because you're not going to answer them. And these are simple questions. Should you abuse children? No, right? She didn't even ask. She had somebody else answer on her behalf. And then she started to bring up these pictures and started to talk about other things. But her attitude was so perfect for the moment, and so, again, I'm a broken record, but she'd done her homework, and that was important. One of the takeaways, there were several. One of the takeaways of this hearing was a lot of the people who were there on behalf of the survivors had gotcha moments. Like, they had things because they have been looking through the files, whereas other people have not. And where they could go, look, you're saying that you didn't know about this. You're saying you didn't do this, but I got you. And one of those was a list of survivors that was unredacted, right? And they're talking about how we haven't had these files the whole time because we had to redact them, and that takes a long time. Well, now we know that most of the redactions are like the email addresses of perpetrators and lawmakers and, politicians and people who are not survivors. The survivors are speckled all over unredacted. Well, here's this list that's like, 40 women, unredacted. And Pam Bondi's like, oh, well, we can take that back. And he goes, well, you talk about us finding stuff and then you can go back and redact it if we tell you. But he's like, let's look at this list. All these women's names, there's one redaction in the middle. So he says, you looked at this list because you took the time to redact one name out of it, and then you moved on. So this is not something you missed. This is something that you saw and you chose not to redact every other name on it. And that was just a perfect gotcha moment. So anyway, I need to move on. The last thing I want to talk about before we do some questions is just this idea of mentorship and intimidation in independent journalism. Now that we're all here, now that we're all doing this together, I have been brought along in like the most lovely and beautiful and welcoming way into this world of journalism that I didn't know existed. Like when I was sitting at home watching the news before all this started, like there were people who had illustrious careers in journalism, and then there was me at home writing essays to nobody. And so I didn't ever expect to speak with anybody or be taken seriously or whatever. And I have to say, so many people in my life at this point have been holding my hand and answering my questions and calling me late at night. And not just like, there's a lot of people who they're like, hey, we'd like to do a live with you, but can I have a phone call first? Which I really, really, really am grateful for. And these phone calls are not quick chats. They're like 30, 45-minute phone calls with people that I've looked up to my whole life. And they are there to tell me their story. They're there to have me ask questions. They are there to like get to know each other so that when we go on and we talk to you guys, it's not our first time together. It's not our first moment. Like we know each other already. And I've just been so grateful for the mentorship. I've been so grateful for like the lack of competitiveness. You think of people like hiding scoops and like trying to do the story first. Like this has not existed in my world on Substack. Like people share stories, they work together. They check in with you to make sure you're doing okay. Like it's just been really, really beautiful to see people who came from really big legacy media to do something that is so gentle and so kind. The flip side of that is intimidation. There is intimidation in this world, and I talked about it a little bit in the live this week, and so I'm going to be a little vague here, but there are people who want you to be afraid of them, who want you to feel powerless and small, who want you to be quiet and not look into things and not make things clear and not share stories and investigate. And I think I made it pretty clear this week that I'm not that person who's going to be made to feel small. I'm not the person who's going to be made to feel less than. Like I'm going to dig, and I will do everything in my power to tell the story in a truthful manner and in a way that is accurate and listening to the people around me and getting the facts correctly. And I'm not going to be afraid of people who feel powerful and greater than and connected to, and it's not going to affect me the way that I think a lot of people would want it to. So that being said, let's answer some questions. Okay, Rebecca B. Ellie, do you ever wonder if any document in the files could possibly be planted to throw us off? Yes, I do. I think there's some of that. I think there are plants. I think there are things that we have come across that are less accurate, but also, and this is something to bear in mind that I've talked about before, there's everything in this files. So when you think of a crime being committed, and there being like an FBI tip line for a crime, they get a whole bunch of tips, right? Let's say that somebody burned down a house and they open up a tip line for people to call in and say, I know who did it, or I have, suspect somebody such and such and such. Not everything that gets called in will be accurate or truthful, right? Some will just be there to join along. Some will be semi-truthful. Some will be really truthful. And so in these FBI files, when you see a lot of these, they'll say somebody called in about something that they knew, or there will be like a story that they know that they're passing along through a lawyer. You have to just, take it with a grain of salt, give everything the eyes it deserves, look it up. But there will be some of that in the files. There will be some things that are just people who are jumping in to be a part of the party, which is awful. And especially after things got really buzzy and people knew about Epstein, there are people who will want to join in on that. But again, like we have to treat everything as truth until we absolutely know that it's not, because survivors deserve to be heard and validated in and around the stories that may be less truthful. And so we have to give everything the same platform. Lanita Jones says, Ellie, can you briefly explain how or why Skittles was used in the journal? Was it used as a handle? That's debatable. I've heard some conjecture. So that was in the quote that was next to the Ivana Trump quote, where she said, you know, if you've been with this man, you would have no dignity. I know I have none. And then she says, all I have is Skittles. It could be as simple as she had Skittles and she was just being cutesy, or it could be code for something. I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. I do know that if you look it up online, and I don't know if Zev wrote about that. I can't remember. There is some conjecture about it meaning something more. Change Champion says, Ellie, based on your conversation with Crockett, do you think they will subpoena others like Cullen, Dan Black, Bannon, and et cetera that are in the files? It was a very short conversation. We did not deep dive into any of that. It was more, she was running out of the room and handed the phone, and she just needed to know some talking points from these journals that were important to focus in on. And I had sent in an email with just like some basics from the journal that were just very important to pay attention to. And she just needed me to basically say that out loud. And then she had the journal, and then they were going to run into the skiff, and then they were going to go out on the floor. So we didn't really, there was no deep dive based on that conversation. So yeah. Bebop, what should we do about Lifetouch? Yeah, so that is something new that new for me, that popped up this morning, was the idea that the Lifetouch company, which is very commonly used for, excuse me, for school pictures, for public school pictures for your children, was owned by Apollo, which was owned by Leon Black until 2021, when I think he was forced to resign, I believe. That's a good question. And you know, somebody said that like writing about that is fear mongering. I did my homework. I looked up Snopes. I made sure that the story was accurate. Apollo really did own Lifetouch. Lifetouch is, I know that Lifetouch is a company that does school pictures. We had a pop-up in my town where we used to live. But it is sketchy because all that digital record is saved forever in their system. But they also had these you know, Melissa Corrigan was telling me this morning, they had these almost like children's driver's licenses that they made, that you could go in and you could get these IDs for your kids that had all their, you know, address, social security, phone number, like everything of height, weight, everything about them, to create these little IDs for the kids. And so all that information is in their system. And maybe that means nothing. Like maybe they don't care about that, but that is really, really concerning. I don't know, you know, it'd be interesting to look up when Lifetouch was first created, when the company started, like how long this was going on. I don't know. That's a new one for me. Nancy wants to know, is there enough facts to arrest Trump? Yes. I mean, we've had enough facts to arrest Trump for a very long time. As I mentioned at the beginning, I have worked in transcription for a long time. I've worked on a lot of these projects. I worked in the Weinstein stuff. I worked in a lot of the Me Too stuff. I worked on the Woody Allen stuff. Like I've heard a lot of these stories, and I've heard in that process a lot of, again, Brett Kavanaugh, that whole, I listened to a lot of off the record conversations during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. I hear a lot of women talking around the table. I heard a round table at an actress's house. I don't know if it's public knowledge, so I'm not going to name the actress, but an actress had a round table of survivors at her house during Me Too, where they just talked about their experiences, and it was all pretty much off the record. Like nobody was making any money. Nobody was looking to get a book deal. Nobody was looking for any publicity at all. They were just looking for community and safety, you know, because there was a few people who were coming forward for the first time. But in that, I learned a lot of stories about Donald Trump and the things that he used to do to women, because there are the stories about young girls, but there are a lot of stories like about E. Jean Carroll as well. Like there were a lot of older women that he would attack as well. Like that was his MO, is everything he described in the Access Hollywood video was his MO. That's what he used to do. He used to like go in the back of a restaurant and like push people up against the wall, or in the bathroom, push people against the wall, and, you know, do as described. Like that's what he used to do. But also he has 34 indictments. He was found guilty on all of them. Like, he has enough to be somebody, and with these files, he has enough to be somebody who would at least be on trial. But the justice system is not just right now. They are not looking. They're being told what to do. There's no checks and balances, and so in that process, it's not that there's not enough information. We have more than enough information. It's that there is not going to be a constitutional consequence for him until there's enough people and enough votes to do so. And that's the goal for the midterms, is that we get those votes. All right, Nikki says, there is a file that is typed up, part of the journal. I don't know if there's more. I assume there is, but the file, and she lists the file names, is some journal entries. Nikki, if you are on Signal, and anybody on Signal, I am red pencil script .10 red pencil script .10. You can send those to me. I try to get through them. Again, I get a lot of messages, but if it's something vital, what I would ask people is, if you're finding lots of things, like some people will find like 80 things a day and send 80 emails. I probably am not going to get to all of those. That's very difficult for me to do and to be digging myself. But if you find something that's very, very specific and it's one thing that needs to be seen, and you haven't seen anybody talk about it, like make sure you're double checking if anybody else is talking about it, because that's the thing is, some of these things are already out there. But if not, like, talk about it yourself or send it to me. That's fine. That's totally fine. Anne says, how is a company allowed to collect and have children's social security numbers just to have pictures made? That jeopardizes security of number for their whole adult lives. I mean, it's like the idea of getting a driver's license. It's all the information that you would have in order to find a missing child, I think was the intent behind it. Is like, if you were to go missing and you had an ID, your parents could use that in order to find you. And part of your identification is your social security number. So I don't know. That is something that came up just today. And so I don't have a lot of information about it, but I do know that it was verified by Snopes. Andy Rankin McGee, can Letitia James file indictments already and start hauling these people in? State charges, so no pardons. I would hope so. I would hope that is in the works, but I don't know. I do not know. I haven't heard specifically what the plan is, but I had better wrap this up because I'm going to go jump on with Waj here in a minute. I appreciate you guys checking in with me and coming to see these lives and listening to me blather, but I have a fun time doing this and talking with everybody and spending a little time with you this week on Friday, and maybe I'll be wearing the same thing again next week. Who knows? If you would do me a favor, go ahead and subscribe to Blue Ant Media. And maybe Lawrence Winterman, who is helping me behind the scenes. Our content is free. It's beautiful. It's thorough. It's filled with humor, but also fact and intent. And we're doing some big things, and we're really excited to move forward with them. But if you could go give them a subscription, I would really, really greatly appreciate it. And I am a contributing editor for Blue Ant Media, so that's why we're doing this each week. And then if you feel compelled, please subscribe to me. I'm Ellie Leonard, or the Panicked Writer. And again, I have no paywalls, so I'm grateful for the people who can have paid subscriptions, but you don't need to. If you can't afford it, don't worry about it. And I love you all. I will see you next Friday, if not before. And I'll talk to you later. Bye.